Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 241, titled How Stories Shape Grief and Identity with Kaitlin B. Curtice. What if the stories shaping your life aren't the ones you would choose today? We're talking about how the stories we inherit and the ones we release can shape our healing, grief, and the way we imagine our future. Today, my guest is Kaitlin B. Curtice, the author of multiple books, including her recent book, Everything is a Story, Reclaiming the Power of Stories to Heal and Shape Our Lives. And together, we are talking about the wisdom that she has gathered about how our stories grow and transform us from within to change the way we see the world around us. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today I'm honored to be joined by author and storyteller Kaitlin B. Curtice. Her earlier books are Native Identity Belonging and Rediscovering God and Living Resistance, an Indigenous Vision for Seeking Wholeness Every Day. And they were both personally challenging and deeply inspiring for me. She also has a series of beautiful children's books, and her work just invites me to reconsider all the stories of my own life, the stories we've inherited, the narratives we've identified with and taken and really made our identity out of, and allowing ourselves to be reshaped. So her newest book is what we're talking about today. It's called Everything is a Story, Reclaiming the Power of Stories to Heal and Shape Our Lives. And in it, Kaitlin explores the narratives that we grow and carry and evolve within, much like an oak tree from seed to maturity, which is a beautiful metaphor throughout the whole work. So I'm so grateful to hear your perspective and talk with you about this work, Kaitlin. So thank you so, so much for being here with me.
Miigwech, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I think is unique about your work and recognizing that we're here to kind of talk about it through the lens of grief. We're talking about everything being a story in our lives, but our understanding is also now in this world that we have stories with unknown and known grief events. And so, for someone who is listening, who isn't as familiar with your work, how do you think this book you've created is going to be a benefit for someone who is grieving and hoping for direction or clarity in their grief process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. I write a lot about grief and about um, liminality, the sort of gray areas, the complex areas of our humanity. And so grief, of course, is pretty central actually to that experience, as is, I don't want to say joy, but connection and moments of lightheartedness and awe and wonder in relationship to grief, moments of gratitude in relationship to grieving. And so all of my books, feature grief in different ways. And so this one couldn't be any different. And a lot of our stories, both our individual and collective stories, are tied to the embodiment, the cycles of grieving. So even if we're hitting it at different moments, different stages, in different ways, personally for ourselves, we're all still interacting with grief in different ways. And I think of I think of grief as a being that we journey with. I think I've written about this in a book somewhere that I contributed an essay to about grief as a journeying partner, that that it's kind of like, when is grief going to knock on the door and come in for a cup of coffee? And that's just a part of our life, is that there are going to be moments and times when that is just there, and it's real, and it's not something we have to shy away from or hide, and so my writing, I always want to write in an invitational way, and that includes allowing people to show up fully, even in their grief, to my words and hopefully to find themselves in those words as well.
And I will say, yes, I think you do that quite beautifully. Your work is definitely an invitation to become curious. And that was something I loved about this book in particular, the metaphor of the acorn to the oak tree, and just recognition throughout the whole book about what is deep within and how are you maturing. And obviously we'll get into that a little bit more, but I am curious what first drew you to the metaphor of choosing acorn and oak tree for this book.
Yeah, I was really excited when that sort of pairing came together for me to pair the life cycle of a story with the life cycle of an oak tree. All of my books have some sort of framework to them. You know, Native was the Potawatomi flood story. Living Resistance was this cyclical framework that I created. And then for this book, I needed a cyclical framework. And I thought, you know, the life cycle of a tree is perfect. And I love acorns. I have a really sweet relationship to acorns. And so I wondered, you know, I knew that the oak tree was a very universal symbol. But I didn't know how much. As I began researching, I learned so much more.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, if I'm considering that stories are living beings that also have a life cycle, then maybe I can pair that with the life cycle of the oak tree. And you know, knew that I kind of fingers crossed, you know, will people go with me on that journey and will it make sense, you know? But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed pairing these two, you know, ideas and embodiments together. It was a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. And I completely relate to that sense of, I think this is cool. Will other people think
Yeah.
it's cool and helpful?
Yeah.
Especially because that even speaks to the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And the stories we carry of, will
Yeah.
someone come along? What's the identity that is coming out of me in this moment, in this season?
Yeah.
And as an author, but even just as a human, what are some of the earliest narratives that shaped your sense of identity that you remember?
Hmm. Well, I write in the beginning of the book, I have this chapter on mirroring and the importance of mirrors, and especially when we're young, you know, what sort of mirrors are being held up to us. And then as we're looking in this mirror, we're being told a story that we're supposed to then repeat to ourselves and for ourselves. And I think actually, when we become adults, a lot of our grief is connected to learning to retell those childhood stories differently to match who we are now. You know, I'm inching closer to, you know, midlife season as a woman. And so that's a really, really powerful time for us to reconsider a lot of the narratives and stories we've held. And so I'm thinking about that a lot lately, but I've always been trying to help guide people to reconnect compassionately with their child selves because we were told a lot of stories. We were shaped by narratives that formed us for better or for worse. And so you know, when I do speaking events for this book and when I share at different places, I always talk about this chapter on mirroring because I think we all need it. I think we all need to recognize, you know, how important narratives are in our, even in our personal, very personal life, that we are constantly coming to terms with the stories that we were told about ourselves and now asking, you know, which ones are sticking and staying and which ones were wrong, which ones were really harmful, which ones were so beautiful that we can hold on to. And that's heavy work.
It is. I was, as you were speaking, thinking of a couple of the narratives that even in just the last week have come to surface through my daughter's experience, and listening to her
Mhm.
as a middle schooler talk about what she's hearing and what she's encountering, and
Yeah.
reflecting on my own life and thinking about, God, the news cycles right now and everything that is so prominent. What are these narratives that I've identified with or embodied that are no longer serving? And can I give myself permission to grieve those
Yeah.
before just saying, like, okay, something new? No, that, like, they leave marks.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 Is there a time in your process of, like, looking back through your own story where you find, wow, this seed planted long ago is beginning to grow, and it's necessary. It's one of those things that, like, gosh, I don't know what it was that suppressed it or stopped it from growing early, but it's been dormant and
Mm,
now it's being awakened.
yeah, I think there's a few things, but something that really, solidified for me in the last year or so. So as I was releasing this book, as I was finishing writing it, was the way that I've always needed and used words as medicine, and that now I'm realizing, of course, that's who I am now because it's who I've always been. But there are seasons where, like you said, that it's dormant or another narrative has suppressed it. And so coming home to ourselves is realizing this there are these sacred threads that have always run through who we are. And I was very controlled by the narratives I grew up with in the Southern Baptist Church as a young woman. And so to reclaim aspects of who I am now in my late 30s and to be understanding, how those show up and then realizing that that was always within me is so healing. I have I'm looking at them right now, but I have, oh my gosh, probably 50 or 60 journals from age about 8 on to now. And I'm so grateful that I have them. I don't know how I held on to them all these years, but every few years I would think I should read these, but it was too painful. And I think it was toward the beginning of last year, 2025, I decided to read them, but this time, I told myself I'm going to read every page and I'm not going to skip the pages that are painful, or I'm not going to judge her for what she wrote or what she thought of herself or God or other people. And I'm going to lean into the really painful parts and I'm going to lean into the beautiful parts and I'm going to read every journal. And I did. And I had to I'd read a few at a time and sort of take notes in my current journal on them. And then I'd have to take a break, because this is grief work as well.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when it hit me that, I was looking back at these past iterations of myself and bringing them forward to who I am today. And pulling that sacred thread and realizing that that is who I've always been. I have always turned to stories and um, songs and poetry as medicine. And I'm still doing that today. And that shouldn't surprise me. And yet it did. But when you are face to face with yourself and when you're face to face with yourself, holding compassion and care at the forefront and really seeing yourself in those different moments of your life and then integrating them and pulling them towards you now and saying this, like, we are all the same person, the same being, just at different iterations and seasons. So how can we now integrate and be all of who we are and grieve together and celebrate together and come together? And it just makes us a more whole version of ourselves. And that's a gift. But it's work. It is work.
To say the least, it is. Yeah. I think what's so beautiful about that too is that our understanding of our younger selves that we look back upon is usually tainted with judgment or with a belief that we weren't good enough in some area. Right. And so when we finally give ourselves
Yeah.
permission to reflect backward with that lens of compassion, there may be an opportunity for us to recognize something that we maybe disparaged or some piece of identity that we've pulled in that doesn't belong to us, that's
Mhm.
not actually ours, that came from someone else, that's a narrative that is damaging us now. And to go back and invite that version of us forward is so generous and so tender. It's such a raw place to go to.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say for someone who doesn't have the journals like you do? As I was thinking about my own, I'm like, oh, I have old planners because I obviously needed to know what I did that Thursday night in
Yeah.
2004, but
Yeah.
journals have been hard to hold on to for me. What would you say for the person who doesn't have them but wants to kind of reflect back in a gentle and kind way?
hmm I think that's where, having like personal sort of ceremony and ritual is really important to have a sacred spot in your home, even if it's just like a little corner somewhere where you have a candle and you have a picture of yourself as a child and you enter into memory and moments with them. I think that that's really beautiful work. Or sometimes it's with your therapist as you're moving through painful memories. But I have a picture of myself down here a little altar, and a picture of my grandma, and just some like sacred items, so that when I sit down to engage with all parts of myself, I'm acknowledging myself when I was 6 or 7, and looking at pictures, even if it doesn't activate a specific memory, it helps us just hold care for the embodiment of who they are. And look at the picture. What is happening in this picture? Maybe you don't remember where you were, who you're with, but you can look into the eyes of that person, and you can look at what they're wearing, and you can look at their body language, and you can get a lot from that. You can get a lot from that. And it may teach you something about yourself and give you just a little bit to bring with you into your life now. And so I think taking the time to even do that is such a gift, and can show us more than we probably realize.
Yeah. That makes me think about how, as we are looking back upon photographs and memories and recalling, and maybe if we're lucky, getting into conversations with people that knew us when,
Mhm.
our grief doesn't just start surfacing because someone dies. It surfaces because we don't have access to photographs, or we don't have access to people that knew us, or our journals. There's so much else that gets lost. And often it's that story that would come along with those people, with those relationships. So, what kind of wisdom can you offer for someone who is standing in that space of recognizing, well, I'd love to do this work, but as I started it, so many other secondary losses surfaced
Mm.
and became distracting and overwhelming? How do I stay present with the narrative I want to understand and I want to give space to?
Mhm. Um, I lost my all of my grandparents by the time I got to college. So I lost my grandma and my grandmother, and then didn't really know either of my grandfathers. So I lost them young, and to not have, those elders in my life now is really difficult. And so I'll say two things about this. One is that it's good to, when we're doing that kind of work and we don't have those narratives, to also like sort of step out a bit and look at the larger arc of our life, and allow the wisdom that comes from that to be a part of our narrative now. If there are things we notice about ourselves, or about our family, or about who we are, the community we grew up in, to sort of pull from that, so then we're not just focused on this one particular narrative or this one thing, but to look at the wider picture. I guess it helps us to resituate ourselves in who we are and where we come from. The other thing is that I have been gifted such sweet relationship with elders who love me, who I'm not related to by blood, but I'm certainly related to by heart, who show me who I am in ways that I didn't even get in my own family growing up. So that it is possible that we are provided for in relationship by people who just see us and love us, and somehow see those aspects of who we are without us telling them. They didn't know us when we were young. They haven't walked through every season of life with us, and yet I have people in my life who see me deeply, and
Mm.
I am safe with them. And those people help us heal parts of ourselves that we may have put away for a while, or narratives that we, covered up, and they bring that out. And so that elder relationship, for us, whether it's family or not, is really special. But I grieve that, not having those grandparents or those particular um relationships in adulthood, but I've also found them in different ways. And I think that's possible for all of us as we open ourselves up to the world around us.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks very highly of the communal grieving process
Yeah.
and how we are collective and we are, I like to say to people, well, if your grief doesn't seem like it has a place to sit, your community is only as healthy and whole as your least healthy, least connected member. So if you feel disconnected, let's find some people that you can sit with that are feeling a little more open or a little more present so that there can be some communal care that's offered. Those relationships don't just come from our family, they come from the people we spend our time with. And it doesn't have to be, this will be an interesting question for you. Um, Knowing that we both have been within Christian culture for a very long time, right? In and out, whatever that looks like. Many times I recall hearing people say, I just don't know how those outside of the church do it. I just don't know how, when someone dies, how do they survive? How do they get through it? And on the outside of that culture, it's very easy to say, well, these are the ways that we move and have connection
Yeah.
and build relationship by not going to church on Sundays. Like,
Yeah.
big deal. There's lots of ways to do it. But I do think it's really interesting knowing that when you have gone from being in a culture that gathers weekly to then not being in a
Yeah.
culture that gathers weekly, that is a very difficult place to say, well, now I need communal care, but I don't know what it looks like.
Oh yeah. 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 I mean, I was a church leader for many years, for well over a decade, since I was young, and when we finally stepped out of sort of institutional church spaces, there was certainly a grieving there. I mean, it's the same kind of grief as when we sort of realize the truth about certain stories, or we realize the truth about America, that it's not maybe what we thought it was, and we start to grieve, because those are also stories that we carry. Things like that. It was the same, that kind of grieving and that panic of, well, who will be my people now? Now, for us, it was also punctuated by COVID and moving across the country. So we literally lost everyone and everything that we knew to move to a place where we knew no one. And so my season of that was pretty stark and very real, and a lot of burnout in that moment for me. And we have to trust the season that we're in. And now, I write in the book about third places, that we have places in our lives where we can show up and we are loved. And, for our family, it's our climbing gym. If there is one place, in my community where I know my kids are safe and totally loved, and if they really needed something, they could go to the gym and find someone who cares about them. It is the gym. It's that place. And that's a real gift to have that. And if we really needed something, or if something was going on and we needed support, we could find someone in that space, even though it's a space built on exercise and movement. It's
Yep.
also a community hub. And so, but the difficult thing is sometimes it takes a lot of time to find those. It took us a lot of time to find this particular place for our family of four people, let alone if you're one person just trying to find that place. Building community is different in the world we live in as well. And I've also realized that I can create incredibly sacred spaces, especially with other writers, especially with women, on Zoom. We
Mhm.
gather monthly and we hold space with each other. And I know them and they know me. And we cry together and we laugh together and we write together. Um, and I love being able to sort of prove to the world that everyone who says, that Zoom is so dry and you can't do anything. And I love proving that wrong by saying, I gather with people who want to show up as they are and want connection. And that is such a gift. And it's in our grieving too. We're grieving together because if you create spaces, no matter where they are, no matter what they are, where people feel like they can show up as they are in all of their humanity and all of their complexity, their grief is going to show up with them. And it should. There should be no reason that it can't. And I have found that to also be true on my Substack, the Liminality Journal. When I write, sometimes someone will tell me a story in the comments, and I just can't believe the beauty of how vulnerable they are and that they trust me with that and trust the community with that. And when we write poetry together, the ways that people's grief just comes through those words, that all for me is evidence that some of these institutional spaces we've created, that there is community outside of those two. And we can find it and we can create it when we need it. It takes time and patience sometimes to get there, but it is out there and it is possible.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing too is a very vulnerable state to show up and
Absolutely.
um, decide I'm going to be my truest self. And there's a little bit of less risk, I'll say, having been someone that has also very much benefited from online spaces and Zoom calls and groups of people getting together and being real
Yeah.
and authentic about what they're going through. You know what? If you hate it, you just end the call and you jump out and you never go back again,
Yeah.
right? It's a little bit easier because theoretically I won't see them at my grocery store. I can
Right,
live
right,
across the country.
right.
But at the same time, there's also a little tiny grief in that of,
Hmm.
man, these people that see me and hold my heart in their hands live across the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And this is the only access I have to them. That
Yes.
that story of like,
Yes.
so yes, I have connection, but am I alone? I really think there's a lot of opportunities for us to rewrite narratives and re-explore our narratives outside of institutions when we are willing to be so vulnerable with people. And one of the things I really enjoyed about your book, and I'll have you expand on this, was you describe different stories that we're in as either loving stories, liminal stories, or lethal stories. And so, how might someone begin recognizing what kind of a story they might be living within and what their next step might be to changing that narrative?
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote that knowing that labels only get us so far. I
Right.
certainly, I was writing this thinking, as someone who writes on sort of liminality and complexity, this could get me in big trouble because because sometimes we love labels so much in categories that then it's like, great. So now I can drop every story I encounter in the world right into one of these boxes and it's going to be
Yeah.
totally clear and make perfect sense. And of course, that's not the way things work. And probably a lot of stories fall into the liminal box for good reason because they are complex or we don't know what to do with them yet. Um, so I'll start there, that there are a lot of stories that we are like, maybe we're in the middle of it, like for going back to that example of us, learning more about ourselves, grieving past versions of ourselves that didn't have what they needed. That's still us in the middle of a story. This story could be our entire life story, actually. And our entire life story is a liminal story. We're in the middle of that. It's mysterious. It's not always clear, and we get glimpses of answers every now and then. We get glimpses of ourselves every now and then. But to also recognize that our souls are so expansive and our beings and our identities and who we are, it's so expansive and beautiful and moving and changing all the time. And that's okay. And so that can be a liminal story. And we can continue to hold that with care. But we can recognize stories in the world that are loving and stories that are lethal. I think as humans, now we can get into the complexities of different value systems or different belief systems and what stories are wrong and right. That's not the book I wanted to write because I can't go there. But we can see in the world if a story is rooted in kinship and care and it's a story of deep connection and belonging in the world, then we can call that a loving story. If it's a story rooted in fear or oppression or greed or hate, dehumanization, stories of war and pain. Not to say that those stories aren't complex and hold nuance, but to say that we can see aspects of those stories that hold hate in them. And hate is lethal, right? So I wanted this book to serve as a tool for us to, if we sort of step back outside of our stories, the stories we tell, the stories we carry, the stories we encounter and read, if we can just step outside of the story and like almost look at it from an aerial perspective and just notice, what are the aspects of this story? What is the message behind this story? Maybe we can learn to recognize a little quicker. Okay, this is a lethal story. How can I shift it to be a loving story? Um, for me, it's like, as an Indigenous person, it's the stories of Turtle Island, of America, of this place that we know. I feel lethal stories turn into loving stories when someone else tells the truth about Indigenous history, or they honor our cultures, or they celebrate something, or they say, "Oh my gosh, I just didn't know this, and I'm unlearning it. This I didn't know this part of history, and I'm really sad and sorry I didn't know. Now I know, and I want to move forward with that knowledge." To me, that's turning a lethal story into a loving one. That's honoring kinship and connection. And so that means a lot to me, and I can see that. And so there are so many opportunities for us to notice sort of where stories land and ask some deeper questions.
Yeah.
And it's lifelong work. I mean, it's not something that can just be done once and it's over. I mean, storytelling is just like the oak tree. It's a lifelong engagement with these living beings as stories. So it will take time, and that's okay too.
I wonder, as you're talking about the people who are so beholden to their family lineage and their identity, when someone comes along and says, hey, that way of being in the world isn't helpful. In fact, it's harmful. Hey, that way of being isn't so great anymore. Maybe it was fine a few generations ago, but it's not now. And the indignation that rises, the fear of, you're telling me my whole family is bad? No, that's too black and white. That's too stark. That's also not loving, and that's not the approach. How do we encounter parts in our lives that are scared to
Yeah.
hear that kind of a message that, like, hey, maybe the way you've lived your entire life isn't so helpful. Can we walk alongside you, knowing full well, like, that's not my work to do, that's their work to do. But
Yeah.
it's also, you're kind of saying, like, hey, go grieve and then return.
Right.
But also, I'm here to grieve with you. How do we do that with people that we love and don't want to write off and don't want to say, oops, strong boundaries, don't talk to me anymore?
Yeah.
But knowing full well, like, listen, the way you've chosen or been taught
Right.
to move through the world is not great.
I think this is a question a lot of people have right now, in their individual lives and then also collectively, like how we approach one another. And it's difficult for me because I have to say to people that not everyone is going to change on the timeline we want them to change, or at all, maybe.
Rude.
You
Frankly,
know,
if we think about it, very rude. I would like them
we
to reconsider.
we can't we can't force people to change. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you push too hard, people are just going to shut down, and they're definitely not going to get there with you. And so, um, I was talking to someone about this the other day, that there's a few things, and some of it's more mystical than other answers you might find, but I have to trust, that there will be moments in people's lives where something will be cracked open a little bit by an experience that they had, by their own grief. People change because something is a catalyst in their life that forces them to reckon with a story that they've carried, right? And that often is what happens. It's like someone personal in your life that you love, an experience with them, a death or a sickness or a big life change causes you to ask deeper questions. Or you're moved out of an environment you knew, and then you're pausing finally to ask some deeper questions than you've asked before. And all of those are, to me, are these like moments where we're cracked open a little and we have the opportunity for change. Doesn't mean everyone will take it, but I have to trust that some people will take it and that there will be those moments. As an author, I know that not everyone loves my books, but I think that sometimes someone might pick up my book and start reading it, and maybe they don't agree with everything that I'm writing, but they're willing to sort of go with me on the journey. And maybe by the end, something has shifted in them. I want to believe that that's possible in the world. Um, and so then we have to ask, how we approach it. And I think something that I think about a lot is art and the power of art as a storytelling vessel, that music is incredibly powerful, that poetry is incredibly powerful, that works of art. I have paintings and little postcards and works of art all over my office because they remind me of something in myself. They teach me something. And I think that art can disrupt our narratives that we are forming and forming and forming around ourselves. And they can cause us to ask some deeper questions as well. So I rely on the artists of our time, the creators of our time to also be those prophetic voices to help crack us open. And that gives me a lot of hope because I have encountered some incredible artists in the world, and they've always been there. They've always been around creating and helping us look differently at ourselves and at the stories we tell. So, so that's a non-answer, I guess, but it's what I've got because it's really hard to say, do this and, someone else will change and they'll tell more loving stories. And that's just not always, we don't have a clear roadmap always for that. And um and so it's a lot of trust in our human journey. And I have a section in the book on how we change beliefs because there are ways in which we encounter parts of ourselves in the world and we do change what we believe. I mean, I've seen people way later on in life who have changed something that they held on to for their entire life and they decided to let go. And so I know that that's possible. And I think those stories are important to remember.
I don't think it was a non-answer, and you summed it up very beautifully there with how what I was hearing was that you've said it quite a few times throughout this conversation too, is that recognition of I have to trust in the power of people around me, in the collective, in my own faith experiences. I have to trust that there are other forces at work, not just myself. And I think for me and for anyone listening who is grieving, who is trying to kind of force their way through it in a lot of ways, right? We think we can power ourselves up to the point of invincibility and just overcome all of our obstacles. Not all of them are meant to be overcome. Some of them are meant to be faced and pressed against and pushed back on, right? That we receive pushback from, because it isn't just us moving through the world individually. That trust in the creativity and the expression and the invitation of others is also part and parcel. It has to be incorporated and honored, because at no point were we created to just be those individuals that go out
Right.
and put a mark on the world that infinitely changes everything. No
Right.
one's done that.
Right.
Everybody's been held up or held back in some way as well. So,
Yeah.
no, I think you answered it beautifully. I am curious. I know as we're, talking about all of this and thinking about the way that even in that partnership with others that we're trusting, we are planting seeds for people. We are helping the cyclical process of growth and hopefully recognition of our stories and what has given us life and what has held us back. What kind of seeds do you hope to be planting right now in people who read your work, who are listening to this? What is one thing that you would ask them? Hey, look back into yourself, at your younger self, into your story, and see if you can find a seed of this.
Hmm. I've been, it's sort of the same thing that I've asked myself because, recognizing for me that words are my medicine, that is the thing that I want to give the world is words and poetry and sometimes music as well. That is my vessel, that is my craft. Um, and I love to ask people what their medicine is because if we look back through our lives and look at our child selves and really see them and see the thread of the life we have lived, there's probably something in there where we find, that moment or that season of life and we realize, oh, this is who I'm meant to be, or this is who I am. We all have something that is our passion and that brings us to life. And that is the thing that we use to help heal other people and to help heal the earth and to help heal our own souls. And so there is some sort of medicine in each of us that we maybe it's been dormant. We need to reactivate it. Maybe we need to water that seed. Maybe we are growing it, like we're in the middle of it and we just are continuing to grow as humans, you know? I've been an author for a decade and I continue to learn so much about words and their power and why I love them so much. And so, I think that it's important for people to ask, you know, what is my medicine? What is my thing to give to the world that produces some sort of alchemy and some sort of healing and care? And if we all started doing that, that'd be really beautiful. And that would bring both some grief and a lot of healing to our world, you know, to the collective. So I want people to start asking that question. Yeah.
I love that question because it makes me think about a much more broad entry point than what are you passionate about?
Yeah.
Because we can be passionate about all kinds of things that aren't necessarily going to be soothing or helpful or
Right.
healing,
Right.
right? I could be passionate about making sure puzzle pieces fit tight instead of loose and fall apart when you bump the table. Not that I've ever thought about that. But like the idea that I have a type of medicine that soothes, that heals, there's an intrinsic meaning in that word.
Yeah.
And that even changes the way I look at someone else's life when I think, well, what are they bringing to the world? Well, what do they think they're bringing to the
Yeah.
world?
Yeah.
What do they believe they are creating as health and, access to others to create a stronger story for themselves or better understanding? I love that so much. Oh, thank you. Caitlin, I could talk to you for hours. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to do that to you. But you mentioned the Liminality Journal on Substack. How can people find you other than that? And obviously picking up a copy of every one of your books.
Yeah. My Substack is where I am mostly, and that it's through there that I do, you know, writing groups, and we're starting some book clubs soon and just sharing
Oh,
poetry and words together. So that's my favorite little corner of the internet. So I will always be there. But also, you know, I'm on Instagram, and my website, CaitlinCurtice.com, sort of will always have my upcoming events and things happening. So I travel a lot and I do a lot of online events, and I'm really excited about some of those this year. So that's probably the best. Between all of those, you'll definitely know what I'm up to and what's coming. I have my new children's book, Autumn's Abundance, will be out in September. So that book is the last in my season series. So then all 4 seasons will be published and out to buy as a box set, which I'm so excited about. So Autumn's Abundance will be out in September.
that's beautiful. Caitlin, thank you so much for making time and again, continuing to recognize words are my medicine and this is what I offer. And uh, just thank you for offering such a genuine and vulnerable part of your own life.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to episode 241 of Restorative Grief. I love that Caitlin named the way that we can explore our stories with this lens of curiosity toward our younger selves and how that person that we were gets to come along and receive their own healing, but also give us some clues about the stories we're in right now and what might be helpful for us as we progress forward. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you so much for being here. Caitlin's work has been an inspiration for me for a long time. And as a griever and an author myself, I think taking alternative approaches to our grief work is really necessary. So be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you can continue hearing more unique views like this. Leave a review if you would like to let others and me know what you thought of the conversation. And remember that you can go deeper with this work by becoming a patron of the show. For as little as $2 a month, you can gain access to all the bonus episodes as well as the workbook that goes along with every single essay and interview. Thank you, as always, to my past and present patrons. And of course, those of you who are considering it, we would love to see you over on the patron website. It's patreon.com/Mandy Capehart. And of course, it's in the show notes. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.